Imagine a land so rich that its treasures were the envy of the entire world. A place where gold, silks, and spices flowed like rivers, creating a whirlpool of immense wealth that drew merchants and conquerors from across the globe. This wasn't a mythical El Dorado or a far-flung fantasy. This was 18th century Bengal. Long before the British Empire cast its shadow over India, Bengal stood as the undisputed jewel of the Mughal crown, a commercial powerhouse whose economic output dwarfed that of entire European nations. The air in its bustling cities like Murshidabad and Dhaka was thick with the scent of opportunity. Its workshops produced the finest textiles, its fields yielded bountiful harvests, and its ports teemed with ships from Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. At its peak, Bengal was responsible for a staggering portion of global trade, generating tax revenues so vast they propped up the declining Mughal Empire. The annual revenue sent from Bengal to the Mughal capital in Delhi was not just a stream of income. It was a lifeline, a testament to a province that was, for all intents and purposes, the economic engine of the subcontinent. Its wealth was legendary, spoken of in the royal courts of London, Paris, and Amsterdam. It was a land where fortunes were made and lost, and where power was measured not just in armies, but in gold. But this incredible wealth did not move on its own. While emperors and kings commanded soldiers and territories, the true lifeblood of this economy, the money itself, was controlled by a different kind of power. In the heart of this thriving landscape, an intricate and highly sophisticated financial system had taken root, one that operated with a speed and efficiency that no royal treasury could ever hope to match. This was the world of India's indigenous bankers and merchant financiers. For centuries, these families had perfected the art of moving vast sums of money across thousands of miles without a single coin ever leaving a vault. They used a system of credit notes called hundis, written promises of payment that were as trusted and as valuable as gold itself. A merchant in Bengal could deposit his earnings with a banker and receive a hundi, which could then be cashed in a distant city like Surat or Delhi. This system was the invisible nervous system of the Indian economy, connecting markets, funding trade expeditions, and financing the extravagant lifestyles of the nobility. It was a world built on trust, reputation, and an uncanny understanding of money. And at the absolute pinnacle of this world stood one family, a name that would soon become synonymous with wealth and power on a scale that is difficult to comprehend today. They were the Jagat Seths. Originally from the Marwari community of Rajasthan, this dynasty of financiers had methodically built a banking empire that stretched across the Indian subcontinent. The title Jagat Seth, which translates to Banker of the World, was not a self-proclaimed boast. It was an official honor bestowed upon them by the Mughal emperor himself, a recognition of their unparalleled influence. From their grand headquarters in the capital city of Murshidabad, the Jagat Seths presided over a financial network of staggering complexity. They were the state bankers for the Nawabs of Bengal, the custodians of the provincial treasury, and the chief lenders to anyone who mattered. Their vaults held a fortune so immense that it was said to rival that of the Bank of England. They controlled the mint, determined the exchange rates for the countless currencies circulating in the region, and held the credit of the government in their hands. They were not just bankers. They were kingmakers. The power wielded by the Jagat Seths was not the kind that was announced with trumpets or displayed through military parades. It was a quiet, pervasive influence that operated behind the gilded screens of royal courts. When a new emperor needed to secure his throne, he turned to the Jagat Seths for the funds to pay his armies. When a provincial governor, a Nawab, needed to finance public works or wage a war, it was the Jagat Seths who provided the credit. Even the powerful European trading companies, like the British, French, and Dutch East India companies, found themselves reliant on the family's financial network to conduct their business. Their influence was so absolute that no major political or economic decision could be made in Bengal without their tacit approval. The Nawabs, who were nominally the rulers of Bengal, were in many ways dependent on their bankers. The Jagat Seths loans were the fuel that kept the engine of the state running. A nod from them could secure a ruler's reign. A refusal to grant a loan could bring a kingdom to its knees. They had mastered the art of turning wealth into authority, becoming the ultimate power behind the throne. As the 18th century progressed, the mighty Mughal Empire, which had once ruled from Kabul to the Bay of Bengal, began to crumble under the weight of internal decay and external pressures. The authority of the emperor in Delhi became more symbolic than real, and regional governors like the Nawabs of Bengal began to assert their independence, ruling their territories as de facto sovereigns. In this shifting landscape of power, the influence of the Jagat Seths only grew stronger. With the central Mughal authority weakening, the real power in Bengal consolidated around two poles: the military and political might of the Nawab, and the immense financial might of the Jagat Seths. Increasingly, it was the latter that held the true balance of power. Their financial decrees became more impactful than royal commands. Their network of agents and spies gave them unparalleled insight into the political and economic currents of the time. While the Nawab wore the crown, it was the Jagat Seths who often decided which head it would rest upon. Their wealth was no longer just a tool for commerce. It had become the ultimate arbiter of fate in the richest province of India. But this delicate balance of power was destined not to last. A new, ambitious player was growing increasingly assertive on the Indian stage: the British East India Company. Initially a humble trading entity, the company was now a formidable military and political force, hungry for greater control and profits. This rising ambition brought it into direct conflict with the young, headstrong Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Dowlah, who was determined to curb the company's growing power and arrogance. A collision was inevitable. Caught in the middle of this escalating tension were the Jagat Seths. For generations, their family had thrived by navigating the complex currents of Indian politics, always backing the winning side, always protecting their vast interests. Now, they faced a critical choice. Would they remain loyal to the traditional power of the Nawab, a ruler they found increasingly erratic and hostile to their interests? Or would they align themselves with the disciplined, organized, and ruthlessly ambitious British, who promised stability and a favorable environment for business? A secret conspiracy began to form in the shadows, a treacherous alliance that would pit the banker against the king and set the stage for a single decisive battle that would not only determine the fate of Bengal, but would also mark the dawn of a new imperial age in India. The banker of the world was about to make the biggest gamble of his life. In the heart of the 18th century, a decision was made in the shadows of Murshidabad, a decision that would not only seal the fate of a dynasty, but also rewrite the destiny of an entire subcontinent. The Jagat Seths, masters of a financial empire that dwarfed many European kingdoms, found themselves at a crossroads. On one side stood Siraj-ud-Dowlah, the young, impulsive Nawab of Bengal, whose unpredictable actions threatened their vast commercial interests. On the other was a group of ambitious foreign traders, the British East India Company, led by the cunning and determined Robert Clive. It was here, in the quiet, opulent halls of the Seths' palace, that a secret deal was struck, a pact sealed not with ink, but with gold. The Jagat Seths agreed to finance the British, to bankroll a conspiracy aimed at overthrowing their own ruler. They saw it as a calculated risk, a necessary move to secure their assets and restore stability. They believed they were merely replacing one pawn with another, underestimating the insatiable ambition of the company they were empowering. This secret alliance became the hidden engine of history, setting the stage for a confrontation that would pivot on betrayal. The stage was set for what would be remembered as the Battle of Plassey in 1757, a conflict that has been mythologized as a heroic British victory against overwhelming odds. But the reality was far more a matter of commerce than combat. The true battle was not fought with cannons and muskets on the rain-soaked fields of Plassey, but rather in the ledgers and vaults of the Jagat Seths. Following their secret agreement, vast sums of money flowed from the Seths' treasury into the hands of the British. This wealth was not used to purchase more powerful weapons, but to buy something far more decisive: loyalty. Robert Clive, acting as the paymaster, systematically bribed the key commanders of the Nawab's army. Men like Mir Jafar, the commander-in-chief, and Rai Durlab, another high-ranking general, were promised immense fortunes and power in exchange for their treachery. On the day of the battle, as the monsoon clouds gathered, a large portion of the Nawab's formidable army simply stood down. Their weapons remained silent, their soldiers were paid to do nothing, and their generals watched as their sovereign's fate was sealed. Siraj-ud-Dowlah, bewildered by the inaction of his most trusted commanders, was betrayed from within. The battle was over before it truly began, won not by British military might, but by Indian money and Indian treachery, orchestrated and financed by the Jagat Seths. With Siraj-ud-Dowlah defeated and soon executed, the British East India Company wasted no time in reaping the rewards of their engineered victory. Mir Jafar was installed as the puppet Nawab, but the real power now resided with Robert Clive and the company. Their first act as de facto rulers was to march straight to the Bengal treasury in Murshidabad, one of the richest in the world. Eyewitness accounts describe a procession of over 100 boats laden with gold, silver and jewels, floating down the river to the British stronghold in Calcutta. This was not just plunder, it was a systematic transfer of sovereignty. The company forced Mir Jafar to grant them the Diwani, the right to collect taxes from the provinces of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa. This single act transformed the East India Company from a humble collective of traders into a governing state. They now controlled the revenue of India's wealthiest region, giving them a near infinite source of funding. They no longer needed to import bullion from Britain to pay for Indian goods. They could now use India's own tax money to buy India's products and ship them back to Europe for immense profit. The merchants had become masters, and the keys to the kingdom had been handed to them by the very bankers who thought they could control them. The Jagat Seths, who had orchestrated the conspiracy to protect their financial empire, soon discovered the bitter taste of their miscalculation. In the immediate aftermath of Plassey, they were rewarded handsomely for their role. However, their new partners, the British, were not like the Mughal emperors or Nawabs, who had understood and respected the delicate balance of power with their financiers. The company saw the Seths not as partners, but as rivals, a competing center of financial power that needed to be neutralized. The dismantling of the Jagat Seths empire was not swift or violent, but methodical and insidious. The British began by asserting control over the minting of coins, a privilege the Seths had long held. They subjected the family's intricate bookkeeping to rigorous and hostile audits, questioning transactions and undermining their credibility. A new financial system, centered around the company's own treasury in Calcutta, was established, diverting the flow of capital and taxes away from the Seths network. The drain of wealth to Calcutta, coupled with the political instability that followed, began to erode the foundations of their banking house. The final, tragic blow came when the two heads of the family, Mahtab Rai and Swarup Chand, were brutally murdered by the fleeting Nawab Mir Qasim in 1763, an act from which the family's leadership never truly recovered. The British, who owed their assent to the Seths, did little to protect them. They had served their purpose and were now an obstacle to be removed. The fall of the Jagat Seths was not just the end of a banking dynasty. It was the moment the floodgates opened. The seizure of Bengal's treasury and its tax revenues initiated one of the largest transfers of wealth in human history, a phenomenon historians call the drain of wealth. For centuries, India had been a global economic powerhouse, a sink for the world's gold and silver. Now that flow was violently reversed. The immense capital that the East India Company extracted from Bengal and eventually the rest of India was shipped back to London. This sudden, massive infusion of capital coincided perfectly with the dawn of the Industrial Revolution in Britain. The wealth of Bengal financed the factories of Manchester and Liverpool, funded the construction of railways and canals, and fueled the technological innovations that would make Britain the workshop of the world. It was Indian money that helped build the infrastructure of the British Empire and financed its global military expansion. In a profound and tragic irony, the very nation that had for so long been the world's economic center was now being systematically deindustrialized, its resources used to build up the power of its colonizer. The prosperity of 19th century Britain was built upon the foundations of a plundered India. The ultimate irony of this entire saga lies in the financial machinery the British used to cement their rule. The systems of credit, taxation, and revenue collection that the East India Company and later the British Raj perfected were not their own invention. They were, in large part, an evolution of the very system that the Jagat Seths had pioneered. The Seths had shown how a centralized financial authority could control a vast, complex territory, funding armies, influencing politics, and underwriting state power. The British studied this model, adopted it, and then scaled it up with ruthless efficiency. They created a centralized financial state, but one where the ultimate beneficiary was not a local ruler or a domestic elite, but a distant island nation. They took the Indian financial blueprint and used it as a tool of subjugation, turning the subcontinent's own economic genius against itself. The Jagat Seths had created a system to control an empire from the inside. The British simply took over that system and pointed its output towards London. In the end, the story of the Jagat Seths and the rise of British India reveals a timeless lesson about power. Empires are not just built on armies and ideologies, they are built on money. Their survival depends on who controls the flow of that money. The Mughal Empire began its terminal decline when it lost control of its finances to powerful banking families like the Jagat Seths. The Seths, in turn, lost everything when they ceded financial control to an even more ruthless entity, the East India Company. And in the 20th century, the British Empire itself would crumble, weighed down by the colossal debts of 2 world wars and the rise of a new financial superpower across the Atlantic, the United States and the dominance of the dollar. The mechanism of the fall is always the same. Whether it is a family, a company, or a nation, true power is lost not when the last battle is fought, but when the last coin is surrendered. If you found this exploration of history and power insightful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And don't forget to click the notification bell so you won't miss our next journey into the stories that have shaped our world.